The great war room of the starship Unity was a circle of light and sound. In the center, a giant hologram showed a map of stars. Small lights moved on the map. Some lights were blue for the Galactic Concordance. Many more lights were a sickly green for the swarm. The air hummed with the low voices of many different species. There were tall ones, short ones, some with fur, some with scales. They were all united in one thing: a fight for survival against the swarm. The swarm was not like them. It was a hive mind. It had no single leader. It was a collection of ships and soldiers all connected by one consciousness. It moved through the galaxy, consuming everything. Worlds were stripped bare. The Concordance was the last hope to stop them. At the very front of the room, close to the glowing hologram, stood Kale. He was a Valorian. His people were known as the strongest warriors in the galaxy. He stood over 8 feet tall. His body seemed to be made of a living, dark crystal that caught the light. His voice was deep and clear like a stone chime. He pointed a sharp crystalline finger at the hologram. "Their numbers mean nothing," Kyle said, his voice filling the room. "A strong spear thrust to the heart will kill any beast, no matter its size. Our intelligence shows their main hive ship is here." A large green dot pulsed in the hologram. "We will gather our heaviest ships. The Valorian shock fleet will lead the charge. We will hit them head-on. We will break their front line and destroy their central command. Their mind will be cut off and the body will die." A wave of agreement moved through the crowd. Many of the delegates clacked their claws or tapped their tentacles in approval. The Valorian way was simple. It was direct. It was strong. It had worked many times before. At the very back of the war room, away from the bright light of the main display, sat 3 humans. Their names were Jin, Mira, and Tay. They were in a small shadowy area with a simpler console. Their part of the room was quiet. Jin was a man with calm eyes. He watched the main display, but his gaze was distant, as if he was looking at something else entirely. His hands were still in his lap. Mira sat beside him. Her face was focused on a smaller screen on their console. It showed streams of data, not ships. She was looking at energy patterns and communication flows. Tay was the largest of the 3. He had a sturdy, dependable look about him. He listened to Kale's plan, his expression neutral. The other species in the Concordance saw humans as acceptable. They were not great warriors. They were not physically strong. Their technology was good, but not special. They were in the alliance because every species was needed, but they were not respected. When Kale finished his speech, there was a moment for questions. Jin leaned forward slightly. He pressed a button to speak. His voice was soft, but it carried in a lull in the noise. "Commander Kale," Jin said, "the plan is very strong, but the initial scout reports from the Tovac system here," a small dim star lit up on the edge of the main hologram, "suggest the swarm may use flanking maneuvers. Their ships have been seen moving in wide arcs. Perhaps a small feint, a false attack from the side, could draw some of their forces away. It would make the main assault easier." Kale turned his glowing eyes toward the back of the room. He looked at the 3 humans. He did not look angry. He looked patient, like a teacher listening to a child. "Delegate Jin." Kale's voice was polite but firm. "I have seen the Tovac's reports. What you see as flanking maneuvers are likely just scattered scouts. The swarm's mind is centralized. It thinks with one will. It will meet our strength with its own. It does not plan clever tricks. A feint would only weaken our main force. True power does not need to hide or deceive. It stands in the open and dares its enemy to face it." Jin did not argue. He simply nodded. "I understand. Thank you for your explanation, Commander." He leaned back into his seat. Mira glanced at Jin. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. A small, almost invisible look passed between them. Tay let out a slow, quiet breath. The meeting continued. Kale gave orders to ship commanders. The great fleet began to prepare for its direct, powerful attack. Later, when the war room was mostly empty, the 3 humans remained at their station in the back. "Do you think he is right?" Tay asked, his voice a low rumble. He was looking at the now empty spot where Kale had stood. Mira shook her head. She called up the data from the Tovac system on her screen. "The movement patterns are not random. They are coordinated. Kale sees a beast with one head. I see a network, a web," Jin finally spoke. "He is not wrong about his kind of strength. It is real, but he is wrong about the enemy. The swarm is not a single beast. It is a system. And you do not fight a system with a spear. He looked at their own console, at the strange non-military software humming there. You fight a system with a key, or a virus. They think we are hiding back here because we are afraid, Tay said. Jin allowed himself a small, thin smile. It is better that they think that. The back is the best place to watch. You can see everyone. You can see everything. No one watches you. They continued their work. While the Valorians prepared for a glorious charge, the humans in the back ran their quiet, unnoticed analyses. They were not planning how to hit the hardest. They were studying how the swarm thought, how it communicated, how its mind flowed from one point to another. They were looking for a seam, a weak point, a single thread that, if pulled, would make the entire tapestry fall apart. They did not know if they would find it in time. But they knew one thing for certain. When the strong spear of the Valorians eventually failed, as they feared it would, everyone would be looking to the front, wondering what went wrong. And no one would be looking at the three quiet humans sitting in the back, who might be the only ones who could see a way to win. The Bridge of the Unity was a monument to power. Its viewports showed the endless black of space, dotted with the sharp angular shapes of the Valorian shock fleet. Kale stood at the central command platform, his crystalline form reflecting the soft glow of 100 control panels. He felt a deep thrum of energy through the deck plates. It was the sound of immense engines powering up for a jump. It was the sound of impending victory. Beside him, his second-in-command, Lyra, watched the tactical display. "All squadrons report ready, Commander," she said, her voice a clear, harmonic tone. "The swarm's signature is strong and concentrated at the target coordinates. They are waiting." "Let them wait," Kale said, his voice filled with a quiet confidence. "They wait for a fight. We will give them an ending." He thought of the human, Jin, and his timid suggestion of a feint. It seemed even more foolish now. This was a moment for clarity and force, not for subtle tricks. "Initiate the jump," Kale commanded. The stars outside the viewport stretched into brilliant lines of light, then snapped into a new, unfamiliar pattern. They were in the combat zone. And there it was. The swarm's hive ship. It was a monstrous, organic-looking mass, pulsing with a faint green light like a sick heart. It was surrounded by a cloud of smaller, faster ships like flies around a beast. "All units forward." Kale's order was transmitted to the entire fleet. "Break their line!" The Valorian ships, shining like polished obsidian, surged forward. Their powerful energy lances cut through the void, striking the front lines of the swarm. Green-hulled enemy ships shattered into silent, glowing debris. It was a perfect, powerful start, just as Kale had foreseen. The Valorians were a hammer, and the swarm was a nail. On the main holographic display, the blue dots of the Concordance fleet pushed deep into the mass of green dots. They were a spear point, driving straight for the hive ship's heart. From his station at the very back of the bridge, Jin watched a different screen. His display didn't show ships as simple dots. It showed connections. Faint, shimmering lines of data represented the communication links of the swarm. At first, these lines were a tangled knot focused on the hive ship, but as the Valorian assault pressed forward, the pattern began to change. Mira, seated next to him, saw it too. Her fingers flew over her console, her face tight with concentration. "The synaptic load is shifting," she murmured so only Jin and Tay could hear. "The primary hive is no longer the only coordinator. Secondary nodes are activating." On her screen, new points of light began to glow brightly on the flanks of the battle. They were not ships she recognized from any Concordance database. They were larger, and they pulsed with a different, more intense energy signature. Tay, who was monitoring the Unity's power grid, looked up. "The Valorians are overcommitted. Their formation is too deep. They've left their sides exposed." Jin leaned forward. He knew what was about to happen. It was like watching a slow-moving disaster. He opened a channel to the main command platform. "Commander Kale," he said, his voice still calm but now edged with urgency. "We are detecting a surge in coordinated activity on the periphery." The flanks on the main bridge, Kale heard Jin's voice. He glanced at the main tactical display. It still showed his glorious spearhead pushing forward. The flanks were empty space. The human was seeing ghosts, frightened by the scale of a real battle. "The flanks are secure, Delegate," Kale replied, his tone dismissive. "The swarm is collapsing before us. Maintain your station." He cut the communication. Jin looked at Mira and Tay. There was nothing more they could do. They had been ignored. Then it happened. From the seeming emptiness of space on both sides of the Valorian fleet, space itself rippled. Dozens, then hundreds of new swarm ships decloaked. They were not the small, disposable fighters of the front line. These were heavy cruisers, their weapons already glowing with charged energy. They had been waiting in perfect silence. The entire battle had been a lure. A chorus of alarms shrieked across the bridge of the Unity. "They're everywhere," a tactical officer shouted, their voice cracking with panic. The main hologram was now a terrifying sight. The proud blue spearhead of the Valorian fleet was not just stopped. It was surrounded. A crushing tide of green dots closed in from all sides, cutting off any escape. "Return fire. All batteries, target the new contacts," Kale roared, his crystalline form flashing with reflected weapon fire from the viewports. The Unity shuddered as a powerful energy beam slammed into its shields. The lights flickered. "Shields at 60%, Lyra reported, her harmonic voice now strained. "The Stonefist has been destroyed. The Skycleaver is reporting heavy damage." Kale watched, his mind reeling as ship after ship on the display winked out of existence. His mighty fleet, the strongest in the galaxy, was being systematically torn apart. His strength, his directness had played right into the swarm's trap. They had not met his strength with their own. They had used it against him. They had let him push in so they could close the door behind him. Another violent impact rocked the Unity. This one was different. It was followed by a deep groaning sound from the heart of the ship. "Direct hit to engineering," someone yelled. "Primary power is failing. Engines are offline." The main lights on the bridge died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency lighting. The great holographic display sputtered and died, plunging the command platform into near darkness. The only sounds were the frantic beeping of warning systems and the ragged breaths of the crew. Kale stood frozen on his platform. The hum of the ship's powerful engines was gone. All he could hear was the sound of his own failure. He had led them here. His certainty had been their doom. He looked at the dark viewport where the silent flashes of his dying fleet continued to light up the void. The swarm ships were now turning their full attention to the crippled flagship. He thought of Jin's warning. The warning he had dismissed as weakness. In that moment he understood the terrible price of his pride. True power needed no deception. But the swarm did not fight with power alone. It fought with a cold, brutal intelligence. And against that, his strength was nothing. He looked toward the back of the bridge, into the shadows where the humans sat. He could not see them in the darkness. He wondered if they were still alive. He wondered if they were still watching. For the first time he hoped they were, because the front had fallen, and there was nowhere left to look but the back. The bridge was a tomb of broken light and sound. The red emergency lights painted the faces of the crew in shades of fear and despair. Kale stood motionless on the command platform. The shock of the impact and the sudden silence of his ship had frozen him. He could hear the panicked breaths of his crew, the soft, hopeless cries of a young officer. The viewport showed only the dark and the occasional terrible flash as another concordant ship died. This was his end. The end of the Valorian fleet. The end of the Galactic Concordance. It was all his doing. Then a new sound cut through the chaos. It was not an alarm. It was the clear, calm tone of an incoming communication on a secondary channel. A voice followed, steady and composed. It was a voice he had dismissed only minutes before. "Command, this is secondary control. We are initiating contingency protocol Guy Bolga." The words meant nothing to Kale. Guy Bolga. It was not a term in the Concordance database. It was not a Valorian word. It sounded strange and ancient. He turned, his crystalline body moving stiffly, and looked into the darkness at the back of the bridge. There, at their small station, a soft, greenish light was glowing. The three humans were illuminated by it. They were not panicking. They were working. Their movements were quick, but there was no fear in their faces. "Secondary control?" Lyra whispered, her voice full of confusion. "What are they talking about?" Before Kale could answer, the main holographic display flickered back to life. But it was wrong. It was not the standard tactical view. This was a different map altogether. It showed the same area of space, but the ships were not simple dots. They were complex symbols. Thick, pulsing lines of energy connected the swarm ships, forming a web of light. At the center of the web was the hive ship, glowing with intense power. But other, smaller nodes also glowed brightly on the flanks. the ships that had ambushed them. Jin's voice came over the comm again, still calm. Kale, your strength has drawn them in. Now their central consciousness is focused here on the kill. We have identified the primary synaptic coordinator. It's not a ship. It's a pattern, a rhythm in their communications. On the human's display, Mira was tracing the flow of energy. The hive ship is the brain, she said, her voice analytical, as if she were in a quiet lab and not a dying starship. But the coordinators on the flanks are the nervous system. They are routing the commands. If we disrupt the rhythm, the brain cannot talk to the body. Kyle could only stare. They were not talking about weapons or shields. They were talking about the swarm as if it were a patient to be diagnosed. What is this? Kale finally managed to ask, his voice rough. What is Gabolga? On the human's console, Tay was rerouting power. He was not sending it to the damaged engines or the broken weapons. He was diverting every last bit of energy to a set of systems the humans had listed as long-range resonance scanners and geological harmonic projectors. The Concordance had approved them as simple survey equipment. It is a key, Jin's voice replied. A key for a lock. You tried to break down the door. We found the keyhole. Another impact shook the Unity. A console on the far side of the bridge exploded in a shower of sparks. We have maybe 5 minutes before life support fails, Tay reported, his voice a low, steady rumble. He did not look up from his work. The projectors need 3 minutes to charge. Lyra looked at Kale, her expression one of complete disbelief. They are using survey equipment to fight the swarm? Kale did not answer. He was watching the human's display. He saw the complex, beautiful, and terrifying pattern of the swarm's mind. He saw how his own fleet's movements had been predicted and used against them. He saw everything he had missed because he was only looking at the front, at the point of impact. The humans from the back had seen the whole system. Can you do it? Kyle asked. The question felt strange in his mouth. He was the commander, the strongest, asking the weak, the timid if they could save them. Mira answered. The swarm thinks as one. It is its greatest strength, but it is also its greatest weakness. A thought, a single wrong idea can spread to all of them at once. We are not going to shoot them. We are going to give them an idea. What idea? Lyra asked. Jin's voice was quiet, but it carried a finality that filled the bridge. The idea that they do not exist. A deep hum began to build through the ship. It was not the powerful roar of the engines. It was a lower, subtler sound. It was a vibration that made the deck plates tremble. It was coming from the humans' projectors in the stern of the ship. On the main display, the web of swarm connections continued to pulse, unaware of the silent key searching for its lock. The humans in the back, who had been ignored and dismissed, were now the only thing standing between the galactic concordance and total extinction. They were not fighting with strength. They were fighting with understanding. And for the first time, Kale understood that one was far more powerful than the other. The deep hum grew louder. It was a sound that was felt more than heard, a vibration that traveled through the bones of the ship and the beings inside it. On the bridge, the red emergency lights flickered in time with the powerful energy drain. Every bit of the Unity's remaining power was being funneled to the stern, to the humans' strange projectors. Kyle watched the main display, his crystalline hands clenched. The view was still the human's strange map of light and connections. He saw the swarm's web, a brilliant pulsing network of control. He saw his own fleet, now just a small scattered cluster of blue symbols surrounded by a vast green ocean of enemies. The swarm ships were moving closer, their weapons charging for the final blow. Power at 40%, Tay reported from the back, his voice calm but focused. He was a rock, managing the flow of energy with steady hands. The resonance field is building. We need to hold them off for 2 more minutes. 2 minutes? Lyra said, her voice tight. We do not have 2 minutes. Look. She pointed at the display. A group of swarm ships had broken from the main group. They were on a direct intercept course for the Unity. Their weapons glowed with a deadly green light. There is nothing we can do, Kyle said, his voice heavy. The ship's weapons were dead. Its engines were dead. They were a floating rock waiting to be shattered. From the back, Mira spoke. Her eyes were fixed on her data streams. They are not just attacking. They are probing. Their central mind knows something is wrong. It can feel the resonance, but it does not understand it. It is curious, Jen nodded. The mind is focused on us now. All its attention is here. That is good. It means the signal will be received by all of them at once. The lead swarm ship fired. A brilliant green beam of energy lanced through the dark space toward the Unity. On the bridge, crew members flinched, waiting for the impact that would tear them apart. But the beam never hit. Just before it reached the ship, the space around the Unity seemed to shimmer. The air itself wavered like heat haze on a desert road. The green beam struck this invisible field and scattered, breaking into 1,000 harmless strands of light that faded into nothing. What was that? Lyra gasped. Resonance shield, Tay said, not looking up. It is a side effect of the projector charge. It will not hold against a full assault, but it will stop a probe. Kale stared. The humans had just created a shield out of nothing, with survey equipment. They had not even mentioned they could do such a thing. They had sat in the back quietly, while his people boasted of their strength. The swarm mind is analyzing the shield, Mira said, her fingers flying. It is sending new commands. It is confused. The logic does not make sense to it. 1 minute, Tay said. The swarm ships, as if on a single command, all fired at once. Dozens of green beams shot toward the Unity. The invisible resonance field flared into a brilliant, shimmering dome around the ship. It held, but it was straining. Cracks of green light began to seep through. The field is overloading, an officer shouted. Almost there, Jin said. His voice was the calm center of the storm. He was watching the main web of connections. He saw the swarm's consciousness, a single brilliant point of will, focused entirely on the strange, vibrating ship that defied its understanding. It was the perfect moment. Ready, Mira said. Now, Jin said. Tay pressed a final sequence on his console. The deep hum stopped. For a second, there was perfect, absolute silence on the bridge. It was more terrifying than the noise of battle. Then, from the humans' projectors, a single, silent pulse of energy radiated out into space. It was not a weapon. It carried no heat, no explosive force. It was pure information. A thought. A virus for the mind. On the main display, nothing happened at first. The swarm web still pulsed. The ship still moved. The green beams were still pushing against the failing resonance shield. Then the central node, the hive ship, flickered. It was a small thing, a momentary stutter in its bright light, but it was followed by another, and then another. The web of light connecting the swarm ships began to fray. The lines flickered and jumped like a damaged data stream. The ships themselves stopped their attack. Their weapon fire ceased. They simply drifted. One swarm ship, a heavy cruiser, turned slowly and, without any change in speed, collided with the ship next to it. There was a silent, bright explosion. Then another ship spun out of control, crashing into 2 others. It was not a battle. It was chaos. It was a system breaking down. The hive ship on the display gave one last brilliant pulse, and then its light went out completely. The web of connections vanished. The remaining swarm ships were just dark shapes in the void, moving without purpose, colliding with each other, or floating aimlessly. The single mind that had guided them was gone. On the bridge of the Unity, the only sound was the slow, steady beep of a console confirming the resonance projector was powering down. The resonance shield flickered and disappeared. The swarm was no longer a threat. It was just debris. The battle was over. They had won. Kale stood, unable to process what he had just seen. The strongest fleet in the galaxy had failed. The weakest species had won without firing a single shot. They had not fought the body. They had killed the mind. He looked at the back of the bridge, at the 3 humans who were now quietly shutting down their systems. They had not cheered. They had not celebrated. They had simply done what was necessary. He finally understood the name of their protocol. Gaibolga, the Spear of Ruin. It was not a physical spear. It was a spear for the mind. And the humans had been holding it all along. The silence on the bridge was heavy and deep. It was the silence after a great storm. The red emergency lights still cast their gloomy glow, but the frantic beeping of alarms had stopped. The only sounds were the hushed whispers of the crew and the low hum of the Unity's backup systems, slowly coming back online. Kyle stood on his command platform, but he no longer felt like a commander. He felt like a student who had just been given the most important lesson of his life, and it had been a lesson in failure. He watched the main display. The humans' map was gone, replaced by the standard tactical view. It showed the drifting, lifeless husks of the swarm fleet, A few surviving Concordance ships, battered and scarred, were moving slowly, gathering together. They had won, but the victory did not feel like his. He turned away from the screen. His crystalline feet made soft clicking sounds on the deck as he walked. He moved past his crew, who looked at him with a mix of relief and confusion. He did not stop to speak to them. His path was clear. He walked toward the back of the bridge, toward the shadows where the three humans were. He found them at their station. The greenish glow of their screens was dimming as they powered down their equipment. Jin was leaning back in his chair, his eyes closed. He looked tired. Mira was wiping dust from her console with a calm, methodical motion. Tay was running a diagnostic on the power conduits he had rerouted. They did not look like the saviors of the galaxy. They looked like three engineers after a long and difficult shift. Kale stopped a few feet from their station. He did not know what to say. The words of praise and thanks he was used to giving felt hollow and wrong. How do you thank someone for saving you from your own pride? Jin opened his eyes and saw him. He did not stand up. He simply gave a small, slow nod. Kale found his voice. It was quieter than usual. The swarm. It is gone. It is no longer a coordinated mind, Mira corrected him gently without looking up from her cleaning. The individual units are still there. But they are empty, like a body after the heart has stopped. You sat back here, Kale said, his gaze taking in their modest console, their position far from the center of power. You saw everything we did not. You saw the whole battle not as a fight, but as a system. It is the best place to see the whole board, Jin said, repeating the words he had spoken before. But now Kale understood them. They were not an excuse. They were a fact. We were the bait, Kale said, the realization finally settling in his mind. My charge, my strength, it was all just a distraction. A loud noise to make the swarm look the other way. So you could do what you did, Jin nodded again. A strong front is useful. It draws the eye. It makes the enemy commit. But the one who wins the game is not always the strongest piece on the board. Sometimes it is the quiet one in the corner that you forgot to watch. Tay finished his diagnostic and looked at Kale. Your strength was necessary, Commander. Without it, the swarm's mind would not have been so focused. It would not have been so vulnerable. We could not have done this alone. Kale listened. They were not boasting. They were not blaming him. They were simply explaining. They were including him in their victory, even though he had done everything he could to fail. He looked at their equipment. You called this geological survey tools. Mira allowed a small smile. It is good to understand the deep structures of things. Whether it is a planet or an enemy, the meaning was clear. While the Valorians studied how to break an enemy's shell, the humans studied how to break its will. They fought on a different battlefield entirely. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of the Battle of the Hive ship spread throughout the Galactic Concordance. The Valorians, to their credit, did not hide the truth. They spoke of their near destruction, and they spoke of the three humans in the back of the bridge who had saved them all with a silent thought. A new respect for humanity bloomed. It was not the loud, boastful respect given to warriors. It was a quieter, deeper respect. A wary respect. They were the species that did not need to be at the front to win a war. Kale saw the change himself. At the next strategic meeting on the rebuilt Unity, the delegates were different. They were less boastful. They listened more. And when Kale entered the war room, he did not go to the front. He walked to the back. The human station was still there. Jin, Mira, and Tay were at their console, just as before. Kale stopped before them. This seat, he said, his voice formal and full of respect. This position. It held the power to unravel an empire. It is the most important seat in this room. He looked at Jin. It should always be occupied by someone who can see the whole board. From that day on, it became an unspoken rule. The seat at the very back of the Concordance war room was never assigned to the weakest species. It was reserved for the ones who understood that true power was not always about being the strongest in the fight. Sometimes it was about understanding the fight itself, and so the seat of honor, the seat of the true strategist, was always and would always be for a human. The strongest species in the galaxy had finally learned why humans sit in the back.